Do you want to start a podcast, but you're worried you'll sound like the podcast bros perpetuating nonsense? Or you're worried that the market is too saturated? Worry not. I have a tutorial for you that will show you all of the steps to curating a professional show that's bound to give your listeners an outstanding experience. Throughout this 7 or so episode series, I'll show you the steps I took to create my podcast and the things I've learned that have helped me remain consistent and interested in the topics I'm speaking about. Hello and welcome back to our How to Start a Podcast tutorial. With today's episode, we're going to be talking about scripting. Today's topic will cover your episode structure, more from last week on the flow of information, your audience and their understanding, the process I use for scripting, including the phases I've undergone, and working your scripting process into your creation schedule. Now for your episode structure. When creating your episode structure, consider including 2 introductions and 2 conclusions, neither of which needs to be long. In fact, the shorter you can keep them, the greater chance you'll have of retaining people's attention. The first introduction should introduce your show, host, and overall purpose or mission behind your podcast as a whole. The second introduction should introduce the specific topic or theme of this particular episode. The second introduction should introduce the specific topic or theme of this particular episode and explain what listeners will learn or gain from listening. So you have one introduction to introduce your show and another introduction to introduce the episode itself. When introducing your topic, it's important to provide context and explain why it's relevant to your audience. Try to frame your topic in a way that's interesting and engaging and explain why your listeners should care about it. You can also use your introduction to establish your own perspective or viewpoint on the topic. Try to frame your topic in a way that's interesting and engaging and explain why your listeners should care about it. You can also use your introduction to establish your own perspective or viewpoint on the topic, and to set up any subtopics or talking points you plan to cover. As for your conclusion, the first conclusion should summarize the key takeaways from your episode and wrap up the conversation. The second conclusion should be a call to action that encourages listeners to stay engaged with your show or take a specific action, such as subscribing, leaving a review, or checking out your blog or sales page. You may also want to include background music during your intros and conclusions to set the tone. Your first intro and your last conclusion can be scripted and recorded once, and then copy and pasted on the beginning and end of every video. Scripted once unless you're like me and you update your intro and outro on a bi-monthly basis. And for your episode intro and outro, you'll script a new one for every episode you write. You can also create a pitch segment to go in the center of your episode. This part is not necessary if you're starting a podcast without sponsors or a business of your own, but especially if you're hoping to have sponsors at some point in the future, you'll want to practice your hand at pitching. Even if you're just podcasting for the sake of podcasting, you can start growing an email list to have a closer relationship with your audience. You can practice pitching even before getting sponsors by telling people why they should subscribe to your email list to engage with your audience more intimately. We'll go deeper into developing your community in the last episode of this tutorial. As an entrepreneur myself, I take every opportunity I can to pitch my marketing services and digital products. Wink. But occasionally it feels a little bit chunky in the middle of my subject matter, and in which case I'll just leave it out. Eventually, I may replace my pitch segment with a pitch from a sponsor, but I'm not bound to do it one way and the same way forever, and neither are you. This is really an opportunity for you to plug and play and change things when you feel that it's necessary to make changes. The more I practice pitching my own business, the better I get at pitching my ideas in general, which is always a good thing, be it for career development or for selling your friends on an idea that you're not sure they'll be interested in. Now, for the flow of information. Your episodes will be structured in a format similar to that of an essay with a fun conversational twist. Keep in mind that it's your job to provide all relevant context to your listeners so that they don't become confused or lost in the sauce. Be sure to speak in simple, layman's language in order to effectively communicate information. This means if you have a factual show that you're breaking things down to teach people information as if they have the understanding of a child. This does not mean that you're limited to only speaking to beginners, but this does mean that you're breaking down information in a way that's easy to follow. This means if you have a show based around science, you're offering resources for people to understand the definitions of the terms that you are using, and not assuming that people have all of the biology prerequisites as if you were in university, but rather you are speaking to a group of fourth graders that are completely enamored with the subject matter of science. Now, if you're using language specific to your belief system, and I see this in the spiritual community quite a bit, also break it down in as simple terms as you possibly can. If you want to talk about goblins, gargoyles, and ghouls, that's perfectly great, but perhaps ensure your audience understands what they are before you dive into your opinions and experiences. Imagine you're having a conversation with your listeners rather than delivering a formal presentation. Avoid jargon or technical language that might be difficult for your audience to understand, and instead focus on using clear, simple language that anybody can follow. Similar to an essay, you'll want to start with a broad theme or question, move into more specific details and examples, and end on your strongest point. Sandwich your weakest points in the middle of your episode, and end again with another broad question to keep people thinking. When I was in school, we called this the hamburger method. I also always like to end on a positive note, so if I have more negative things to talk about, I typically put those closer to the middle as well to leave my audience with a sweeter taste in their mouth. If you're scripting your podcast, it's important to balance preparation with spontaneity. I hope I'm saying that word right because it's always been a challenge. You want your podcast to sound natural and authentic, not like you're simply reading from a script. To achieve this, try your best to inject some personality and spontaneity. Go with the flow of your intuition while reading from a script. If a particular section feels chunky, feel free to remove it or rephrase. If you have a sudden burst of inspiration that takes you off script, follow it. Be open to improvising or deviating from your script if the conversation takes an interesting turn. And now for your audience and their understanding. I always recommend authenticity over palatability any day. However, this can be nuanced when speaking to an audience because you're going to want to meet your people where they're at by adapting your language. Some tricks of the trade that I've picked up over time are in order to speak from a place of authority, you'll want to avoid negation. This means, as often as possible, swap your don'ts, won'ts, and can'ts for what does, will, and can. For example, if you have somebody driving you somewhere, you won't want to say, "Don't look at that handsome horde of hamsters having a classy conference meeting in the field over there," because they won't actually hear the word don't. All they'll hear is that there's such a magnificent sight to be seen. Instead, you can say, "Keep your eyes on the road, and when we pull over, I have a picture to show you." This also means avoiding phrases like shoulda, woulda, coulda, and instead focus on what must, will, and can be. Another thing to think about when appealing to your audience's understanding is their engagement. Remember to ask questions, and you may not get a response at first, and when you do, it'll be so gratifying. Remember that these are simply guidelines. Even for myself, I use plenty of shoulds, don'ts, and won'ts, but as often as I can, I like to keep this in mind to make swaps where I can sound more authoritative while also remaining respectful and actually sounding human. These are tricks to speaking with authority, and when I do occasionally use a negation tactic, I'll follow it up with the truth. Let's say, for example, in my script, I say, "The sky is not orange." I'll follow it up by saying it's actually blue. We will dive even deeper into your audience in our last episode about community. However, these are some relevant points to think about in your scripting process. Now, for how I script my episodes and the phases I've undergone. I have experimented with every single style of scripting except for completely improvised. I always like to record with an intention which requires some planning. I've recorded my episodes reading word for word on a piece of paper, and in fact, before I put my show on YouTube, I recorded in my PJs with greasy hair in a pineapple bun. Now that I'm also on camera, I actually have to put some form of effort into brush my hair and tidy my room. Not that I always tidy my room or that I honestly even really care what people think about how I have my hair or the way that I present myself, but I do find that it makes me feel more confident when I'm in the editing process to be able to scroll through and see that she puts in effort. I've also created scripts from bullet points that cover my main topics, my subtopics, and jot note sentences that I can build off of within each subtopic. And I've created scripts with only 5 to 6 bullet points and trusted my intuition to give me the relevant rambles as I was recording. These methods are completely acceptable and common in many shows, especially in interview based shows. However, as a typically solo podcaster, I like to have my thoughts more organized. I also find when I'm entirely off the cuff that I tend to ramble more and go down tangents that lead to nowhere, and I end up taking longer in the editing phase, so the time I saved in my planning is wasted in the end with my editing. I also script differently when I'm hosting an interview compared to a solo episode. My interviews look more like bullet points and pointed questions, as there's another person in the room to gauge the flow of conversation. My favorite way to script is actually a balance between word for word and occasional tangents when I feel a spark of information mid recording. This is especially my favorite because I figured out I can use my Notes app on my laptop overlaid on my recording so that I'm actually looking at my script, but it looks like I'm looking at the camera, and you're not just watching the top of my head while I read my handwritten notes. Seriously, I used to hold my scripts like this and just read on the camera until I figured out a better way to do it. Another suggestion, and perhaps it's obvious to anyone who isn't me, is to actually type your scripts as opposed to handwrite. This makes it so much easier to fix mistakes and move information around. I still prefer handwriting over typing, but I've developed an appreciation for the tippy tappy sounds of scripting in Flow so that I save my handwriting for journaling. I also appreciate that my hands and wrists don't tire out as quickly as they did when I was writing with a pen and paper. When creating a script, consider your audience and what they want to hear. What questions do they have? What topics are they interested in? And try to put yourself in their shoes to think about what would be most valuable and engaging for them. The greatest question you can ask yourself as a podcaster is, would I actually listen to this myself? While some podcasters prefer to improvise their episodes, others find it helpful to create a script or outline to guide their conversation. A script can help you stay on topic, avoid tangents, and ensure you cover all of the important points you want to make. I recommend, even if you're improvising your episode, to create an outline that highlights key points you want to cover within your show. This can be a simple list with 3 or 4 bullet points that act as your subtopics. If you're not sure where to start with your script, consider creating a rough outline of your episode. This can include a list of talking points or subtopics you want to cover, as well as any questions or prompts you want to ask your guests if you have them, or to ask your audience if you don't have a guest. Once you have a rough outline, you can start fleshing out your ideas and creating a more detailed script. Don't be afraid to experiment with different scripting styles and formats. Some podcasters prefer to create highly scripted episodes that are tightly controlled and planned out, while others prefer to take a looser, more improvised approach. Ultimately, the key is to find a style that works for you and your audience and to continually refine and improve your approach over time. Now for your creative schedule. When you're developing your creative schedule, remember to include time for brainstorming, developing ideas, research, actual scripting, and then recording, editing, writing descriptions, and creating a cover photo or thumbnail. And even uploading your episodes can take time. All of these things need to be included in your creative schedule so that you can maintain a schedule that you can actually keep up with and communicate with your audience when there happens to be delays. We will dive deeper into the media creation side of your podcast in a later episode titled Creating Media. When you're brainstorming, there are no bad ideas. Create a document or notepad and fill it with all of the potential episode themes you could dive deeper into. Then, when you're developing your ideas, go a step further and picture what subtopics you could attach to each theme. If you're struggling to think of subtopics, the idea might not fully be realized yet, but that doesn't mean you can't save it for later. In your research phase, remember, as I've said in our past episodes, not to overdo it and drive yourself into information overload, and remember to speak on topics that you are well versed in. When you're scripting, allow all of your ideas to flow, and remember, if there's something you wrote in your script that doesn't feel right when you say it, you can always rework it while you're recording and remove it in the editing phase. As for writing descriptions and creating a cover photo, I have some shortcuts. I use the same cover photo for all of my episodes with minor tweaks to suit each theme, which takes me all of about 5 minutes to complete. For my descriptions, and this is why typing your scripts is king, I copy and paste my script into ChatGPT and ask it to convert my original script into a video description, and of course, I reread it for accuracy. I also try to schedule my episodes out at least 1 to 2 days in advance so that I'm always having myself ready by Wednesday if I'm supposed to be posting by Friday. I've been posting weekly for some time now, and I'm so proud of myself for not missing a week in, well, weeks. When I first started my channel, I actually took about a 6 month hiatus while I moved, was dealing with some personal dramas, and then created my course. Now that I'm back stronger than ever. You can post weekly if you want, or bi weekly, or even monthly. Just be sure to communicate that with your audience and remember to be fair to yourself. Posting weekly can be challenging. It means, honestly, to me, that I'm always playing catch up to get my next video out. Writing one script is typically a full day event, then recording and editing are another day, and creating the media and scheduling out is a third day. I also like to make sure I give myself creative breaks from time to time. This also means that in order to take creative breaks, I occasionally want to work ahead. This means aiming to get 2 to 3 episodes done in one week so that I can take a 2 week break before getting back into things. I always recommend if you feel like working beyond your scheduled routine, do it because there will be times when you don't feel like doing it at all, and creating a bank of scripts and episodes will help you avoid falling behind and feeling like you're drowning. Now, this episode is coming to a close, and thank you so much for tuning in. Today's key takeaways are to structure your information in a conversational and digestible manner, to script your episode however the heck you want, to develop a creative schedule that's cohesive to your well being, and to find shortcuts wherever you can to make that process run even smoother. Remember to subscribe and stay tuned because in 2 weeks we're discussing the recording and editing process. I've lumped these two together because they're generally short topics on their own. Thank you again for being here with me, and I'll catch you in my conclusion. Don't be afraid to experiment with different scripting style. Don't be afraid to experiment with different. Don't be afraid to experiment with different scripting style. Don't be afraid to. Don't be afraid to experiment with different. Don't be afraid to experiment with different. Don't. Anyway, thank you so much for being here with me. If you haven't already, now is your chance to subscribe to my channel. On a weekly basis, we talk about the superpowers and setbacks of perceived flaws to develop self acceptance. We also discuss cultivating creativity with sustainable work life balance, and now we talk about podcasting. Check out the links in my description for all the ways that I can help you, and thanks again for being here. Cheers for now.